All right, we've got a whole lot of information to share with you today, and so we're going to get started. You've joined us for Telling Stories with Data, a crash course in data visualization for non-expert audiences with Brian Klaas. This presentation was prepared for the Great Lakes PTTC under a cooperative agreement from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, or SAMHSA. The opinions expressed in this webinar are the views of the speakers and do not reflect the official position of the Department of Health and Human Services. I've got a couple of housekeeping items to share with you. If you have a technical issue, please individually message me, Rebecca Buller, in the chat, and I will do my best to be helpful. If you have questions for Brian as we go forward, please put them in the Q&A section. If when you put them in the chat and we use the chat throughout, we lose them as they scroll by. So your questions are important to us. Please put them in the Q&A. If captions would be useful, please use your Zoom toolbar near the bottom of your screen and choose live transcript. AI note takers are not allowed in our trainings and will be removed from the Zoom room. And certificates of attendance will be sent via email to those who attend the full session. And now I'm going to turn things over to Brian.
All right. Thank you, Rebecca, very, very much. Hello, everybody. Nice to see people from all over the U.S., not just the Great Lakes, although the Great Lakes are wonderful. Big shout out to Michelle from Annapolis, another fellow Maryland there. I lived in Maryland for 30 years. I am a faculty member at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, where I teach courses on storytelling, communication for non-expert audiences. And the presentation I'm giving today, this webinar, is based off of one of the classes that I teach there. I also happen to teach about generative AI, a lot about generative AI. I'm very lucky that I get to do all of this. I'm also at the Bloomberg School of Public Health, the director of the Center for Teaching and Learning. So hopefully I'm bringing a little bit of what I know about engagement and learning to the table here. Yeah, it's great to see people from all over the US in today's session. So I'm going to go ahead and share my slides, which hopefully you will be able to see here. And if you run into problems, again, you've got Chris and Rebecca who are here for you to be able to chat with you and help things out. I live in Rincon, Puerto Rico now, and sometimes our Starlink internet isn't as great as it can be, but hopefully that will not cause me any problems at all. Well, Michelle, I'm glad you've participated in great trainings from Bloomberg. It's a great institution. Bloomberg School of Public Health offers a lot of free on-demand trainings. If you are interested in those, you can look up the school and see what kind of trainings are available there. But let's jump in. Let's get started because we've got 2 hours. There will be a 5-minute break about an hour into the presentation. So yes, you'll get a chance to get up, grab a drink, cup of coffee, use the restroom, whatever it is. So let's get started. Take a look at this visualization. This is a choropleth map. Choropleth map is a map where colors indicate value. It's a choropleth map of the United States with counties in the United States highlighted. What story does this visualization tell? What story does this visualization tell? How about now? What story does this visualization tell? You don't have to answer, just think about it. How about now? What story does this visualization tell? So there's a lot of power in storytelling when it comes to public health, prevention, substance misuse prevention, all of our work, everything we do in our daily lives. Stories are powerful because the rich scholarly literature around narrative, in particular, storytelling, if you want to call it that, but I'll refer to it as narrative, makes it clear that we think, we act, we communicate in terms of narratives. Each model we hold in our head of how the world works begins with a story. And narratives provide the context in which the facts we observe can be interpreted, understood, and acted upon. They're much more than the stories we tell or write in a figurative way. Narratives end up being the truths or the ideas we accept as truth that underpin the perceptions that shape our realities and in the process form our cultures and societies. And visualizations, particularly visualizations in public health and the health sciences, are powerful forms of this kind of storytelling. They're foundational and powerful in this discipline because visualizations give meaning to data. They take pure numbers, rows or columns, or even whole pages of numbers, and turn them into something that's immediately meaningful for most audiences. And how you organize those shapes and lines and colors in a visualization tells a story. It influences how much your audience is going to understand that data. Because we as humans are wired to see data, not read data. Nobody likes reading a giant table of data with 50 rows and, or sorry, 50 columns and 3,000 rows, right? We can't process all of that data correctly and quickly due to the limitations of working memory in our brains, which is very powerful, but there's still limitations. We simply can't handle all that data at once. Our working memory just cannot keep up. And modern public health in particular, and I include the broad sort of scope of public health, including substance misuse prevention, and that is built on visualizations. This visualization is probably really familiar to you if you ever studied epidemiology. This is John Snow's map of the cholera outbreak in London in 1854. And believe it or not, this is actually a really interesting bar graph. It might not look like a bar graph, but it's a whole bunch of bar graphs where you have lots of different x-axes. Each street becomes an x-axis upon which values are mapped. And this visualization was transformational, not just in understanding the nature of outbreaks, but how we built what we now look at modern epidemiology. And not too many years later, Florence Nightingale changed the field of nursing and certainly the treatment of patients and patient care through the collection of data and the resulting visualizations that she made, right? And this is probably her most famous visualization. It's a polar area diagram, or a rose chart, as some people call it, of deaths in the British Army in Crimea and their causes from 1858. And this particular visualization really went on to change how data was looked at and how visualizations were made in the field of medicine and patient treatment and care. And Florence Nightingale herself certainly recognized we need to move beyond pure numbers, especially when we're dealing with, as she called it, the vulgar public or non-expert audiences. Non-expert audiences need something more than just pure numbers. And I would argue really that most of us, if not all of us in the health sciences and substance misuse prevention need something more than pure numbers or double column tables, right? And I think it's also important to note that while visualizations can bring great benefit to the public's health and our understanding of what's going on in our world, visualizations can also be used for evil. Many of you may recognize this as a redlining map that was used in Baltimore to institute a century plus of structural injustice in this community. So in 1910, the first ordinance in Baltimore on racial zoning was passed. And following the Great Depression, the Homeowners Loan Corporation in Baltimore started to mark up city maps, assessing risks of investing in certain neighborhoods, with majority Black communities considered the riskiest financial investment. And they marked up those majority Black communities on these maps in red. And this became known as redlining, and these are known as redlining maps. And there's been a lot of research that has shown how these maps, created almost or actually over 100 years ago, have long-term, powerful, lingering effects on the quality of life and the most vulnerable populations in Baltimore. And had these visualizations never been created, maybe we would see different outcomes for Baltimore City today. So visualizations sit at this powerful intersection between data, policy, societal change, and storytelling, between a lack of understanding and being a force for change. So I think it's really important we recognize this before we jump in, and I'm going to do that right now and talk about the science of storytelling and data visualizations. So the first next 15, 20 minutes are going to be about the science of storytelling and visualizations. And then we're going to jump into a lot more like practical stuff about how do you actually apply that in creating visualizations for non-expert audiences. Because there is a science that tells us how to make our visualizations easier to parse, easier to understand, and be more meaningful to our non-expert or even expert audiences. And I'm going to skip over a lot of stuff, the science of light, the human eye, all that good stuff, and instead focus on how our brains respond to collective visual input. Because reading a graph or a chart or any visualization is not like the spontaneous comprehension of seeing a photograph. The process is much more like the complex cognitive processes of reading a paragraph of text where we link individual facts and ideas together. And really, the key idea behind the core principles of human visual perception is that people interpret ambiguous or complex images as the simplest forms possible. And I'll show you some of that as we move along the next couple of slides here. So, distinguishing between spontaneous comprehension and the process of linking many visual elements together takes us to the Gestalt visual principles of visual perception. The Gestalt principles of visual perception. One of the most powerful tools visualization designers have in understanding how their visualization will be processed by the human brain. And the classic example of this principle are the Olympic rings. So rather than seeing these as five separate rings, even though in this particular image there are different colors to help distinguish one ring from another, we see them as a unified whole because, again, people interpret ambiguous or complex images as the simplest form possible. And so there's a bunch of Gestalt principles of visual perception. There's a bunch more, but I want to focus on the ones that I have on the screen here because the other ones that are out there are really less relevant to data visualizations than these six: proximity, similarity, closure, continuity, connection, and enclosure. And I'm going to walk through each of these and show you how they work. So let's start with proximity. The principle of proximity states that items near each other are perceived as being part of the same group. Things that are closer together are perceived immediately as being more related, whether or not they're actually related to one another. So you'll see this a lot. Things that are close together feel like they belong. Next up is similarity. And the principle of similarity states that objects that are similar are categorized together when we look at them and they're perceived as being materially different from other objects. So things that are similar to each other, even if they're not physically placed next to one another, are perceived as being part of the same group. And although, color is more of a pre-attentive attribute and not a principle of visual perception, color is frequently used to indicate similarity. Color and shape, in particular, are used very often to indicate similarity in data visualizations, which tells our audiences these things go together. And even parallel lines can be considered a form of similarity, right? The same slope and the same angle gives you the idea that things are moving together in the same direction. So parallelism is really a form of this principle of similarity as well. Now, the principle of closure states our brains are going to fill in gaps in clearly delineated lines or arcs or curves, just as we do here, right? We see on the left that that's supposed to be a circle, even though there's a piece missing. And we see on the right that it's supposed to be a rectangle without having to have the complete line visualized for us. Now, the principle of continuity says that our brain links together different pieces of what we recognize as being the same thing. So here we have a bunch of dots, right? But the principal way our brain sees this is as it's a curved line. We follow the curve, we follow the line of dots, because things that sort of follow each other in a continuous fashion from one point to another are perceived as being part of the same thing. And in terms of visualizations, we see this principle when we find arcs or lines inside of scatter plots or pie charts or even in a bar chart, where we see a continuous slope going downwards or upwards. And we perceive these things in a line as being more related to each other than things that are not in the same line or on that same curve. Now, the principle of connection is pretty straightforward. It says items that are literally physically connected to each other are perceived as being part of the same group, which makes sense, right? They're literally physically connected to one another. And you'll see this like in a line graph, right? A bunch of points and there's a line between them and it says this is all part of the same group. And finally, the principle of enclosure, which basically says items located in the same enclosed region are part of the same group. So bounded objects are perceived as a part of a group regardless of what other characteristics those objects might have because of that bounding box. So if you put a box around a set of data in a visualization, regardless if it's from the same data series or not, it's going to be perceived as part of the same group because of that bounding box. So remember, non-expert audiences interpret ambiguous or complex images in the simplest forms possible. And this can lead to challenges in terms of capturing subtle data variations, but it still, again, should be a guiding principle in your data visualization work. People are going to look for the simple, easy answers, the simple, easy meaning from that visualization right away. That's what they're going to do. All right. So now that I've told you about all these different sort of Gestalt principles of visual perception, I want to do a really quick quiz. And you can type your answer into the text chat. You don't have to like raise your hand or anything like that. You can type it in so that everybody can see it in the text chat, and I'll see it as well. You don't have to use the Q&A pod for this. We're not doing Zoom polls for this. Just type it into the text chat. Okay. So I'm going to show you a data visualization. And then I'd like you to type in what principles do you think are at work? What Gestalt principles of the ones that I just went over do you think are at work? And I'll list all the principles on the left side of each slide. Okay, so just type your answers in the text chat when you're ready. So here's the first one. Which Gestalt principles are at work in this particular visualization? Proximity, similarity, closure, continuity, connection, enclosure. Go ahead and type what you think in the text chat there. All right, we've got a bunch of people saying similarity. Absolutely, right? Color. Color indicates these things are similar to each other. So we're mixing all kinds of data. We're mixing like gender, age, race, economic status. Those are all grouped by color, which gives us that sense of similarity there. And proximity too, right? Things that are similar are not just grouped by color, but they're grouped by physical location on the slide itself. Yeah. So, yeah, and continuity, right? We're seeing increases or decreases within certain groupings there, like especially the age groupings. I would also argue that enclosure is something at work here because although there is not a physical bounding box, the white space between these groupings provides us a kind of physical bounding box, right? There's like a white box. Imagine a white box around each of those groupings that says these things go together, but it's really similarity and proximity more than anything else there. All right, next up, next one, slightly different. What Gestalt principles are at work in this particular visualization, this line chart? Right. Continuity, connection, closure, right? Because we had that gap. There's missing data from 2013. So there's closure there as well. But yeah, those big ones are continuity, right? Because again, this is a line chart and we're seeing all these data points sort of connected to each other. So it's continuity, connection, and then closure to say, yeah, we understand there's no data for 2013, but we can kind of like see where the lines go between those two there. Yeah, absolutely. All right. Last one. This one's a little bit different. What Gestalt principles are in this particular visualization, which is also a choropleth map? I love choropleth maps. Most people do, and I'll talk about why a little bit later on. So I'm seeing a lot of people saying similarity, right? Because you have similar colors indicating similar values. Connection, absolutely, right? Because states are physically connected to one another. And shape, yes, exactly. I would say enclosure, right? The shape of those states is important. That shape, those shapes of the states, the outlines of the states become a form of enclosure, not just for individual states, but for the whole of the continental United States as well. Yeah, so proximity, similarity, connection, enclosure, all of these things are at work in this particular visualization. All right, thank you. Excellent, excellent work. Thank you for participating there. All right, so now that we've covered the Gestalt visual principles of visual perception, let's move on to the other key factor in how data visualizations are processed, and that's pre-attentive attributes. Pre-attentive attributes, because these are also really important. In fact, these are probably things that make more sense to you when you look at a data visualization. So what are pre-attentive attributes? Well, these are attributes that our brain, or more exactly, our spatial memory, subconsciously process when we look at something. They're the very first thing you pay attention to when you look at a figure or a graph or a chart or a painting or a house or a car or pretty much any object composed of multiple parts. And there's a long list of attributes that are included in modern research around pre-attentive attributes and the way in which we process visual information, but I'm going to focus on the ones listed here. And let me start, let me just say this first. You're going to want to use them, right, to highlight what's important in your visualizations. Really, the whole point of me covering pre-attentive attributes is that pre-attentive attributes are features that just pop out. They pop out from their environment, and we can use those pre-attentive attributes to highlight what is of most importance. What is of most importance in your visualizations? So let me show you how pre-attentive attributes work in this case. So here we have a simple line chart, right? Simple line chart. There's two data series. They sort of progress from lower to higher values. But we're using lots of different pre-attentive attributes here. Shape, right? We've got two different lines with two different dash lengths. So that's different shapes are being used to indicate different series. We've got line widths because it's a line chart and we're using thicker lines to indicate our data series we want people to focus on, but thin lines to help provide a grid in the background to help say these are the different strata and to help understand there's a generally increasing set of values here. We use color for different series, right? There's different colors for different series. Saturation as well, even though I'm using two red shades, I'm using different saturations there to help distinguish one from the other, which is important for people who might have red-based color blindness. Size, right? Again, not the lines for the series versus the lines of the grid. That makes a big difference in terms of how we perceive the things and separate them. And also markings. Markings are a pre-attentive attribute. Here I've highlighted the data points from 2016. I arbitrarily chose them and just put diamonds there to say, hey, look here. So when we look at this, the things that immediately jump out to us are those markings, which is a pre-attentive attribute, or the line series, which is the different colors, right? To distinguish it from everything else. That's a pre-attentive attribute. And obviously line width or thickness, size of things helps to orient us spatially and say, here's what I want you to look at first. And if you close your eyes and open them again, where your eye goes first is probably those markings because they use color and size and a different kind of shape at that data point to say, hey, look at this here first. So that's pre-attentive attributes in action. And some of these pre-attentive attributes are more effective than others in terms of how we sort of automatically visually rank and order data before we truly understand the data. And these ranking functions that we naturally kind of automatically do are really focused on our ability to estimate values and estimate values visually. And as we make these estimations, we also do comparisons between different pieces of data in real time in our working memory. So there are some pre-attentive attributes which encourage and facilitate this, and some that really aren't good for it at all. So working from the top of that chart down, we're going to go from pre-attentive attributes that enable faster and more accurate estimates down towards pre-attentive attributes that enable general estimates in a much slower and less accurate way. Okay, so the ones we're looking at first are the better way to do things. The one we get to at the end are less good in terms of how you should think about creating your visualizations. So, first and foremost, position among common scales is the fastest and most accurate way that we, as perceivers of a visualization or other kinds of pieces of data, can rank information. Because position is the clear winner for precision ranking, designers often prioritize the vertical and horizontal dimensions of two-dimensional space when depicting or organizing quantitative data. So for numbers, you want it on that X and Y axis whenever possible, right? It just makes it easier for our audiences to process and quickly rank and estimate that information. The next fastest and most accurate estimate in perceptual ranking is length. So the length of a bar, the length of an arrow, the width or height of a shape are also measures of length. And we're pretty good as human beings at saying, oh, this one's bigger than that one when it comes to length, specifically across horizontal and vertical dimensions in two-dimensional space. Less fast to process and less accurate than length is direction or slope, angle, or parts of a whole. So direction and slope in an individual line, it's kind of hard for us to tell if two lines are exactly parallel to one another unless they are, well, not really parallel, but in this case, right angles. Right angles are easy for us to perceive. Parallel lines, are they exactly parallel or not? Right? And the same goes for angles that might stand alone. It's hard for us to make the determination between, say, an angle that's 38 degrees and another angle that's 40 degrees. We just can't tell. We have to do a lot of guessing. And then finally, part to whole comparisons are also more difficult for us to accurately estimate. And I'm going to talk more about this when we discuss pie charts later on, because our estimation with pie charts is based off of determining arc lengths, right? The length of that sort of outer curve of an individual section of the pie. And humans are really not good at determining precision when it comes to arc lengths. And the least effective geometric attribute that enables estimates in a quick and accurate way is area. So look at the circles that are on the slide in front of you, on the left side of the slide in front of you. Look at the circles. Can you really tell that the two largest circles are not the same size? Or the two smallest circles, are they the same size or not? It's hard. It's hard to know that, right? And in the tree map, the colored tree map that's on the right, can you tell if the red and the green boxes in the middle are the exact same size or not? They might be slightly different from one another, but again, we're trying to use area as a measure instead of length. We're not able to make accurate estimates very quickly, or really even accurate estimates at all. Moving further down the list of effective perceptual ranking from a two-dimensional space to a three-dimensional space, volume is worse than area or angle or length or position among common scales in terms of creating effective perceptual rankings. So looking at these four boxes on the screen here, you can see that two are bigger than the other two, but are they the same size? Right? Because we have to not only make estimates in one dimension, we now must make estimates in multiple dimensions, even though those estimates are actually being projected onto two-dimensional space. This is not a good way of enabling accurate estimates or doing them very quickly. And this is just one of many reasons why you should avoid 3D charts at all costs. You really, really should. And then finally, shading and saturation can theoretically be used for estimation, but really only on a general scale. Because how do you know in a pure gradient that isn't separated by individual steps like you see on the screen here, how do you know that one step to the next, it means 5 steps up, or one step up, or 20 steps up? It's really difficult with shading and saturation to know what the actual value that's represented by that shade or that saturation or that color all working together means. And if we can't know the value, it's very difficult for us as viewers to make quick determinations about relative ranking. And we'll talk more about this when we look at choropleth maps later on. And finally, believe it or not, color hue is the least accurate and least precise way of enabling perceptual ranking in our visualizations. So what's the value of the green versus the yellow? What does beige mean? Or the rust red on the end represent? Color hue is generally a poor way of estimating value because color hue has no intrinsic numeric value. So, as you're building your visualizations, is a really easy test you can use to assess if you're using pre-attentive attributes strategically. Close your eyes, then look at your graph. Where your eyes go first is where your audience's eyes will likely go first. So you want to make sure that your audience's eyes are going to the right place in terms of the story you're trying to tell and the point you're trying to get across. This is a very simple but incredibly effective test when you're building your data visualizations, and it relies on these pre-attentive attributes and how we naturally process them. Okay, time for another pop quiz, because everybody loves pop quiz. I'm going to show you two mini visualizations, and you're going to tell me which of the two, A or B, enables more accurate estimates. Okay, you can type in the chat A or B for the one that enables more accurate estimates based on the information that we just went over. Okay, so here we go. Which one enables more accurate estimates, A or B? Yeah, right on it. Everyone's like, A. A. Yes. A, absolutely, right? Again, you've got that X and Y axis that helps to orient us. You've got lines in there that says these are the demarkers between different gradients or strata, the values there. Absolutely. Next up, A or B? Yeah, A. Once again, length is much better than area. Go with length over area whenever possible. And we'll talk more about this when we get to bar charts. I'm sorry, bar and pie charts. Next one, A or B? A or B? Yeah, B, right? Because again, you've got your X and Y axis, you've got your grid. It's really hard for us to determine value based on angle or arc length, as I was saying before. All right, last one. Which one, A or B? Which one generates better, more accurate estimates? Right, right. And here again, neither are particularly good, and I wouldn't say this is the best way to try and get people to make quick and accurate estimates as they're quickly processing your visualizations. But if you have to do it, a binned or clearly delineated, clearly sort of stepped gradient is going to be much, much, much better than trying to rely on color to do that. Because again, color has no intrinsic quantitative value at all. All right. Whew. We got through that. Enough with the science. Enough with the science of processing data visualizations. Let's move on to some more practical guidance, or at least something that I think is more practical. Even though we're going to come back to the Gestalt principles of visual perception and pre-attentive attributes over and over when you build your own visualizations. You're going to be thinking about this. I hope you'll be thinking about this moving on. So let's start with something that isn't really a visualization. Let's start with text. Let's start with the titles. The text above or aside the visualization that puts everything in context. But why? Why are we starting with titles? Isn't this a webinar on data visualizations? Yes, but titles are the single most influential element in storytelling through data visualizations to non-expert audiences. The message that comes across to your non-expert audience about that visualization is strongly, strongly influenced by the title that you put on it. And it's so important, especially, again, this is one of the biggest differences between working with expert versus non-expert audiences. You need to say what the data means, not what the data is. When I teach my classes at Johns Hopkins over and over again, I tell students, say what the data means, not what it is. You're talking to other health scientists, you're talking to PhDs at Johns Hopkins, fine. You can say what the data is because they'll be able to derive the meaning. Your non-expert audience, in most cases, or if you're dealing with novel data in unusual formats, they will not be able to know what the data means. You've got to be explicit about it. This is such a huge trap for health scientists and those who work in health science policy and implementation and communication to the public about public health. Expert audiences have all their training and experience to allow them to figure out what data means. That absolutely is not the case for non-expert audiences. So give me an example of this. Again, I show you this. You saw this at the beginning of the webinar. What does this choropleth map represent? What will it mean to an audience of, say, police officers if you just show it like this? What will it mean to an audience of police officers? So we add a title. Because without context, the visualization is pretty meaningless, right? Without any other context, without a bar, a legend, or any text or anything else, the visualization is kind of meaningless. And this is a kind of, I think, typical title you'd see on a report on drug overdoses in the United States. But what's a crude death rate? Will your audience of police officers or people at a local PTA know what a crude death rate is and how it maps to counties in the United States? I'm going to guess not. So when we change the title to something that tells us what the data means, it's meaningful and immediately understandable to our non-expert audiences. Now we can see the story. Now we can understand the problem because we've told what the data means, not just what the data is. Again, I'm going to repeat this a lot. When you write your titles, write it to say what the data means, not what the data is. That is so critical when you're working with non-expert audiences. And how we write the title influences the perception of the data. So here we have a large line chart that shows a percentage of college students reporting drinking more than 5 drinks per week between 1988 and 2024. And so the title here is, after decades of effort, college binge drinking is on the decline. And I can see, right? Even if I am red or blue-based colorblind, I can see that the lines are going down. Cool, great. But if I change the title to something else, we now get a different story. So why is drinking by college women declining more slowly than college men? Why is that? Why are those two lines converging together? This visualization says things are going great, right? Because it's all going down. But this visualization says things aren't going so great. We've got to focus more on drinking by women because it's not declining at the same rate as men. Why is that? We need to focus on that. So how the title is written strongly, strongly affects the meaning and the interpretation of the data. And from a cognitive processing standpoint, titles are critical to clarity and persuasion. Because when the chart title includes the point, the cognitive load of understanding decreases. You do not want your audiences to puzzle over the meaning data, right? Make the meaning and your intent in using that data clear. We all read headlines about how in the United States in particular, statistical knowledge is really low, statistical education is really low. We can't assume that our audiences are going to know what that data means, even if it seems obvious to us. So again, we can reduce their cognitive load when the chart title includes the point, when we tell them what it means. So write your titles like a newspaper headline. And just as with newspaper headlines, put a verb in the title. Put a verb in the title, even if it's the word is, because adding a verb makes information more actionable and understandable by non-expert audiences. So write your titles like newspaper headlines. Okay, now that we've talked about titles for a bit, time for another activity here. And what we're gonna do is I'm gonna show you a data visualization. And I want you to rewrite the title of that visualization. There is no right answer at all. You're probably not gonna have all the rest. In fact, you will not have all the rest of the context for the data I'm gonna show you. Just going on what you see on the screens, on those visualizations. I just want you to rewrite the title to tell me and the rest of us here in the webinar what you think that data means. What you think that data means. Yeah, so Karen pointed out in the chat in prevention outreach materials, she's always been told to write at a third grade reading level so you can convey an understanding to the majority of the population. Absolutely. And I hate to say, I mean, like everyone's like, oh, third grade reading level. Well, no, you do. And I'll tell you, look, I'm a faculty member at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, the #1 ranked school of public health in the world. And there are many, many students who are at this graduate institution who often cannot understand the meaning of a data visualization if the title is not written at a relatively elementary level for them. Because they are not experts. They are learning. They are learning what a box and whisker plot is, or a tree map is, or whatever the data is, and they need that guidance. Once they become experts, you can say, okay, here's what the data is, not what it means, and they have the knowledge and experience to figure that out. And these, again, are students in graduate school, but they are not experts yet. So you've got to write it at a relatively straightforward level. Yeah. Quick and easy to understand without filling in the blanks, right? Just remember, your title really influences the perception of what the data means. All right, so here we go. And I'll be quiet to give you for 30, 60 seconds to give you some time to think about how to rewrite the title here. So here's the first one. Here's the first one. It's a line chart. Lines are going down. It shows past 12-month cannabis use in Minnesota between 2013 and 2025. So come up with a title that tells me what this data means, not just what this data is. And I'll be quiet for a little bit while you do that. Okay, we're seeing some come in. These are great. Yeah, cannabis use has been declining since 2013. It may feel obvious, but sometimes to some people, it's not going to be obvious what it is, right? Cannabis use in Minnesota showed meaningful declines in the past decade. Absolutely, right? It is declining. Youth cannabis use has declined at all grade levels. Absolutely. More youth are choosing not to use cannabis products, right? That's a different kind of headline. That's about youth choice rather than necessarily the whole trend, right? Right. And Patty, excellent. Prevention efforts have led to a decrease in marijuana use in Minnesota from 2013 to 2015. That's a great story to tell, right? Like our efforts are working. It's not just that it's declining, but our efforts as prevention specialists are helping to drive this down. Now, of course, you'd only want to say that if you actually have data to say that certain interventions do that. But again, these are different titles, right, that help us understand the meaning of the data. And this is great. Sylvia's title was, "Why is 11th grade decline slower?" That's a really good question, right? Why is that one slower? Or, 8th grade, why is that declining slower, right? There's different stories to say. Lauren, over 87% of students do not use cannabis, right? There's this sort of perception that everybody in high school, everybody in, middle school, high school, everybody under the age of like 12 is smoking pot whenever they can, right? Not true. Over 87% of students do not use cannabis. These are all really, really good headlines, right? Yeah, this is good. You want to say what the data means, not just what the data is, right? Yeah, this is really good. All right, so I'm going to move on to. I know there's lots of ones, here, and there's different stories you could tell, right? In here, Sylvia points out, is that the numeric decline versus the endpoint impact? How do we look at different grades? Again, depending on the story you want to tell, you're going to have a different headline, but you want to focus on what the data means. All right, different kind of visualization. This one's very different. So this is again a choropleth map. You know I love my choropleth maps of years of life lost to opioid overdose deaths in Ohio between 2010 and 2016. What's a different kind of headline? That's what the data me is, right? Years of life lost of opioid overdose deaths in Ohio between 2010 and 2016. What's a different kind of title you could come up with here? Good title, James. Very good title. Hmm. Okay, we're getting some in here. These are fantastic. And I apologize I didn't get to everybody's titles, in the last assignment. I just need to move things forward because I want to be cognizant of time. So Magdalena, I love your title. Are opioid deaths in Ohio really just a rural problem? Because especially when we talk about, in sort of my perception of the public health crisis of opioid overdose and opioid or, all sort of substance misuse in places like Ohio, it tends to be this sort of stereotypical image of these small towns in the Rust Belt that have been devastated by opioid use. But the data tells us a different story. And that's part of the reason why I added in the markers on this choropleth map. So you know where Cleveland, Columbus, and Cincinnati were, because those have the highest concentration of opioid deaths, or at least in this case, years of life lost to opioid overdose deaths. So I think that's a great, great title that challenges the status quo, right? Um, yeah, or that opioid overdose is slowly declining. Ohio's biggest cities losing years of life due to overdose. And you're going to tell a story depending on who you are. If you are a prevention specialist working in Cincinnati, you're going to tell a different story than a specialist who's working in, say, like Harrison or Carroll counties on the eastern side of Ohio there. Everybody has a different context, everybody has a different story to tell, right? And this is really important. This is part of where the title becomes more and more important. You can tell so many stories. Maddie, I love your title, Missing Time with Our Loved Ones. What a great narrative, emotional way of talking about this topic. It's not just abstract years of life lost. It is missing time with our loved ones. What a beautiful way of posing that. That's awesome. That was great. Right. Or again, as Gina says, with ramped up prevention measures, we see a decline in opioid overdoses, right? Or why do certain cities in Ohio have an increased opioid overdose death compared to various other cities? Again, this is one of the ways in which, again, the way you tell the story, or the way you tell your story is strongly influenced by the title. And you have so many options. As Nicole says, Cincinnati, Columbus, Cleveland have the highest rates of overdose. How can we strategize to reduce the rates? There's all sorts of stories that we can tell in here. These are great. These are really, really wonderful. Megan asks, not a title question that I have. How is the data compared to population size? Of course, the numbers would be larger in urban areas, but is that relative to population size? And how does that compare to rural areas? Yeah, that does make sense because that is data that's not necessarily in this visualization, right? It naturally makes sense that Hamilton County, which is where Cincinnati is going to have higher numbers because there's a higher population there. That's not necessarily represented by this particular visualization. And we always run into limitations by the visualizations that we choose or are given. If we're not creating visualizations ourselves in our presentations, in our outreach, in our community outreach work, or, funding presentations or presentations to our peers, a lot of times we don't get to choose like what kind of data is represented, and we have to acknowledge the fact in this case that yes, population isn't represented here, and there is a kind of logical, natural, or causal trend between between population size versus total years of lost life. And that's something that we have to acknowledge and recognize because not every visualization, again, particularly those that we don't get to make ourselves, will be able to include and incorporate there. So that's a really good point, Megan. Thank you for bringing that up there. All right, thank you again to everybody for your great, really, really good titles that you wrote there. So titles are critical to an audience's understanding of a data visualization. But how do you know what that title is supposed to be, right? Well, let me reframe that question a little bit. The last time you made a chart for a presentation or a report, did you sit down and create the visualization before the title? Or did you come up with a title before you fired up Excel or Tableau and created the visualization? Have you ever really stopped to plan out a visualization before going into Excel, right? Not a lot of people do that. I didn't do that for the longest time. And then as I got better at this and started teaching, I was like, oh, I should practice what I preach. And it really makes a difference, right? Because when it comes to creating visualizations for non-expert audiences, it's critical to first ask yourself, what am I trying to do with this visualization? As we saw, I just gave those visualizations there, so many different stories that you came up with in those two different visualizations. Exact same visualization, exact same data set, entirely different stories there, right? So ask yourself, what am I trying to do with this visualization before you start worrying about chart types and colors and label fonts and all that good stuff. And by having a goal-oriented process for visualizations, you're ensuring that you're achieving the goals you intend to achieve. So how do we do this? What's a goal-oriented process that we can use? Well, there's a simple three-step process that you can use to help figure out and frame each visualization you make with clear intent. And this is something I teach my students at Hopkins. So first, audience. Audience. Start by thinking about your audience. Your audience is really important. Expert versus non-expert audiences are very different from one another. But there's a series of specific questions you can ask about your audience that can help you think more clearly about whether or not your visualization is going to achieve its goal. First of all, what are their expectations? Not yours. What are their expectations? What are they coming to you for? Are they attending a conference? Who are the people who are going to be attending that conference? Are you meeting people at a community meeting? What are their expectations from that community meeting? Reminding yourself of what the expectations are from your audience will help keep your visualizations aligned with those expectations. Next, what's their level of expertise? The audience at a conference of opioid chemists is going to be very different than an audience of parents at an elementary school. Is your audience going to be the general public reading in a newspaper? Is it going to be teenagers on TikTok? The expertise of the audience determines the content level and the detail that you can provide in that content. And yeah, you're going to get a copy of the recording. That's all going to get sent out. And the slides. I think the slides already went in the deck here, but you'll get a copy of them as well. Next up, how is this going to be distributed, right? Is it going to appear in a newspaper? Is it going to appear in social media on, say, Instagram, where all the images are square? Is it going to be on TikTok, where the focus is on motion instead of static delivery? The channel of distribution will have a strong influence on the size, shape, and format of that visualization. And finally, accessibility. And this is not just thinking about content accessibility, is the way that I write my content accessible to my audience and understandable to them, but also from a more traditional physical accessibility perspective. Is your audience mostly going to be older people? Are they going to have low vision issues? Have you thought about color blindness issues in your audience? Thinking about accessibility of your content is also important to make sure that once you've created this great visualization, everyone is able to consume that visualization. All right, so the next step is focusing on the action. Focusing on the action. And this means asking the question, what do you want your audience to do with this information? Not just understand it, but what do you want them to actually do with this information once they've processed it? What's the goal? Are you trying to change minds? Are you trying to get them to take political action? Are you trying to get them to give you money for funding? What is the action-oriented goal of this visualization? And once you've decided exactly what your audience should do, thinking as they do, thinking like your audience helps you see potential holes and problems with the argument you're trying to make in your visualization, right? If you're going into an audience that is, really hostile to the idea of active interventions in your community, you got to recognize that and make sure the visualization in all your content helps to address that point. And then the last step in this three-step process before you fire up Excel and work on your visualization is to write the headline, right? Write the title of your visualization. And it might seem obvious, but that headline should make the point of the story you are trying to tell. Headlines are the thesis of your visualization. So write that first before you create the visualization. And at the end of the process, when you're done creating the visualization, just make sure that the visualization really does reflect the statement of the headline. You need those two to match. And if it doesn't, you need to rethink your creation process. So by having a formalized process, we can be better stewards of our own visualizations and create visualizations that really help us achieve our goals. And right now, I'm going to share with you in the chat here. I'm dragging it into the Zoom chat here. I'm going to share with you a document, the same document I give my students in my data visualization classes to help you through this goal-oriented process and come up with a targeted action-oriented visualization. And this document, I'm sure that Chris and Rebecca will help distribute it as well. And I really hope you'll consider using it the next time you need to create a visualization in one of your presentations or reports. It really does help with the process. So a question from Lee came in the Q&A. How do you balance or manage the impact of titles on distrust of data? On distrust of data. You can see it in your community. Writing these types of titles could be questioned as spin and not being truthful about the data. How do you address this as you create titles and visualizations? This is a great question, right? Because whether we like it or not, there's a lot of distrust among the health sciences right now in this country, in certain parts of the country in particular. You could live in one county and people could be like, yeah, vaccinations are important and critical. And another county that's 20 miles away, totally different reaction to those things. So it is the question of spin. And I think, what's important again is that what I just said was that the title and the visualization as represented need to align. If there's disconnect or discordance between those things, people will pick that out immediately and be like, you are making something up. You are doing spin on this data. As long as those two align, that significantly reduces the possibility of reactance by your audience. So reactance is sort of when your audience sort of like you present information in a way and they're like, nope, not true. Fake news, as the case may be. So aligning those two is really important. And also, I think on some level, not being careful about being overly emotional about the way you write the headline, right? We still want to restrain some of that to give it a sense of factual evidence and honest inquiry, right? You could write headlines that are super super emotional, look at this terrible, the increase in opioid deaths in Minnesota in the last 3 years is a tragedy. That kind of like over emotionality about things can cause reactance, can lead people to jump to sort of pull back. When you add 5 exclamation points at the end of a sentence that you think is really important, that can lead to reactance in your audience. But when you sort of thread that needle a little bit between, not only aligning the title with what people can actually see in that data, that's really important. Being honest about the data. Like the question that I got asked about, well, what about population versus years of life lost in those certain counties? Yeah, you got to be honest about that and say, yes, you're absolutely right when someone points out a flaw in the data or something that might be missing. Being honest about that builds trust as well. Some people will come to the table completely unwilling to trust anything you say or do. And unfortunately, there's not a lot you can do to change their minds, except maybe set them up with a large language model. There's been some research recently that large language models are incredibly powerful at changing people's minds on political or sort of sensitive political topics, much more so than just sort of giving them facts and data. But that's an entirely different story, an entirely different presentation. There's sometimes you can't convince people because they are so reactive to what you're presenting. But if you're trying to align as truthfully and honestly as possible between title and data and intent and goal, you'll really cut back on that a lot. All right. So yeah, I know some people can it might not be able to download the template because your version of Zoom may be locked down. This template will also, that template I just shared will be posted on the Great Lakes PTTC website there as well. Yeah, and Simone, again, thinking about ahead of time. What are questions that people might have? What are objections that people might have? And again, I mean, I don't mean to go off on the AI thing, and there's lots of issues around using AI in our daily work. But one thing generative AI tools, chatbots tend to be really good at is coming at you from a different perspective. You could put a visualization in a chatbot and say, here's my audience, here's what I'm concerned about, what are problems, what are questions I might get asked. And they will come up with some really, really useful, come up with a good analysis, useful analysis of things you might be asked, coming at you from a very different point of view. It's a really powerful use case for chatbots saying, hey, come at me. Come at me, bro, with a critique of this, with a different perspective on this, a different perspective that I would have. Very, very useful there. All right, so we're about halfway through the webinar. We're going to do a quick poll. I believe Rebecca has a poll waiting for us. Please do respond to the poll as soon as it gets launched. There you go. It should be on your screen right now. Please do launch. Please do go ahead and do this poll. I'll talk over it for the next couple of seconds, but then Rebecca's going to do a timer for a 5-minute break. So you can get up, go get a drink, walk outside, get away from your screen for 5 minutes, stop listening to me. If you have to answer emails, you can go answer emails or maybe deal with the kids or your cat or your dog or whatever it is. But please answer the poll, and then we're going to take a 5-minute break. We'll come back in 5 minutes to pick up where we left off. And we're actually going to spend the rest of our time today looking at individual types of data visualizations, what's good about them, what's bad about them, where you should think about using them when you're working and communicating data and ideas to non-expert audiences. All right. All right. So Rebecca, I think, can we start the timer now? I think we can start the timer now. So enjoy your 5-minute break, but please vote in the poll. Please vote in the poll. right, welcome back. Hopefully, you are here and back and had a good little break there and responded to the poll. Hopefully, if you haven't responded to the poll, please make sure you do so. Hope your break was good. I went outside and just stuck my legs, walked in on the steps of my little plunge pool. Felt wonderful because here in Puerto Rico, el sol es muy fuerte, very, very strong. And it's hot and humid, as it tends to be this time of year. So that was nice for me. All right. So welcome back. And I'll just remind everybody, if you have questions, you can put them in the Q&A, sort of broader questions, but I also try to take advantage and follow along with the chat as well, in case there's questions in the chat there. Yes. Thank you, Brianna, for the Puerto Rican flags. I love it here. I'm very lucky to live here. Extremely lucky. All right. So in the rest of our section, rest of the time today, we've already looked at titles and the process of coming up with titles quite a bit. But visualizations aren't just titles, right? We need to look at the process of picking the right chart for your data and for your story, and what chart types work better for specific kinds of storytelling with data. And while tools like Excel or Tableau let you create a lot of different kinds of charts, we're going to look at 4 key chart types, which honestly will probably be the only ones you need in when you communicate to non-expert audiences. All right. So the classic canonical example of a visualization by category is the amazing, awesome, excellent, and glorious bar chart. Yes, I like bar charts. And you'll use the bar chart to compare numerical data across categories. And the great thing about bar charts is they can include a lot of different categories. Now, you don't want to probably visualize 78 different categories in the same bar chart, but a bar chart is remarkably flexible and useful. And a good rule of thumb when creating visualizations is that if you can reasonably use a bar chart, you should use a bar chart. Again, humans can pre-attentively process those rectangles, those individual bars, really well. And that's why bar length on a common scale sits at the top of that perceptual rankings list. We perceive the values in the bar chart from the length of the bars, and that's very easy for us to do. And our experience, even our basic statistical experience we received in our elementary education, teaches us how to do that very, very quickly. So while bar charts are awesome, there are some things you want to look out for. First and foremost, bar charts are okay for displaying changes over time, only if you have a few data points. They really start to fall apart visually, and I'll show you in a second, in terms of being able to label and annotate them properly when you have a lot of data points over time. And here's an example of this, right? Here's a bar chart that really should be a line chart, because line charts are the best for time-based data, or almost always the best for time-based data. Putting this data in a bar chart makes it harder to see trends over time, which is the whole point of line charts. Now, I used a bunch of pre-attentive attributes to make this much time-based data tolerable in a bar chart format, but this still would have worked better as a line chart. So if you're using lots of groupings, especially time-based groupings, use a line chart instead of a bar chart. Next up, you always want to start the y-axis of your bar charts at 0. Please do not start a bar chart y-axis at anything other than 0. We use pre-attentive visual processing to scan the area of each bar, and that area matters. So always start your y-axis at 0, or you'll overemphasize or underemphasize differences between bars. And let me show you this in action. So here I have a bar chart that shows drug overdose in US adults in 2024. And you'll notice in this bar chart, wow, people under the age of 35 are not dying, right? That group, there's like nobody there. But look at the huge difference between 25 and 34 and 35 and 44, right? There's a huge difference there. Nobody's dying in that youngest group. But look at where the chart starts. It starts at 30 instead of 0. But if I fix this and actually start at 0, we're getting an accurate representation that tells a very different story. Lots of people in the 25 to 34 group are dying. It's not just people over the age of 35, right? We're being more honest, we're being more truthful. People will sometimes say, well, the story I want to tell will focus on people above the age of 35, so I'm going to start the y-axis at 30. No. You're creating a dishonest visualization. This gets back to that issue of trust, right? Be honest about it. You can still tell that same story because there is a significant gap between 25 to 34 and 35 to 44. You can still tell that story, but be honest about it. Don't start your y-axis at anything other than 0. And finally, if you got some long category names, long like labels on your x-axis, please do not make your audience turn their head to read that axis. Don't let Excel go to its default of wanting to display that label on a 45-degree angle. It does not look good. It actually impedes comprehension because vertical text is bad. Even in small doses, it significantly increases cognitive demand and takes your audience out of the moment and away from the effective delivery of your content, right? You're all like doing this right now, and it hurts your neck. Don't do that. Don't do that. Now, one of the easiest ways of telling a story in data visualizations is to simply order the data. Because the order of the data can shape the audience's perception of the story you're trying to tell. In addition to the title, the ordering of data, particularly in bar charts, can really shape the perception of the story you're trying to tell. So in this not atypical bar chart, we have a series of data ordered alphabetically, right? Alphanumerically, because that's something that makes sense to us. And that's usually default in tools like Excel, right? We're like, sort this data alphanumerically. And while one group stands out from the rest, we can emphasize the story we're trying to tell by focusing on the groups that stand out the most or stand out the least. So if we want to tell a story that there is a generally upward trend, we can put the highest series value as the last bar in the chart. If we want to emphasize disparities between of one group over the rest, we can put that largest value as the last bar in the chart. In the same way, if we're trying to emphasize and tell a story about a generally downward trend, or we're trying to say this one group has more resources or is maybe better off than all the other groups that are displayed in the chart, we can put them as the first bar in the chart. So again, unless there is a specific ordering system, like say chronological ordering on a time series graph that is really necessary for the data to make sense, oftentimes ordering the data around high and low points helps us to emphasize the story we are trying to tell. So that's my quick tour of the amazing and glorious bar chart. And now we're going to play everybody's favorite game, Fix That Chart. We're going to do this a lot for the rest of the webinar here today. So I'm going to show you a chart, in this case, a bar chart or two, and you in the text chat are going to tell me ways of fixing that chart, right? Based on the knowledge that you have, based on the knowledge that you gained earlier, not just when I was talking about bar charts, but also thinking about the Gestalt principles of visual perception, pre-attentive attributes, and how to write the title, right? The importance of the title, the importance of storytelling that I've already covered. You're going to type in the chat, fix how you would fix that chart. Just give me one idea. Doesn't have to be long. How would you fix that chart? Okay. So here we go. Here's our first example. So this is a bar chart of the infant mortality rate per 1,000 live births in different countries around the world. How could we fix this chart? How could we fix this chart? Okay, make a line graph, right? Because it is data over time. That is definitely one way to do it. Michelle says flip it, right? That might be another way. The data might be clearer, right? The fact that there is a significant decline between 1960 and 2017 would be better represented if the lines were vertical instead of horizontal, but they'd be even better perhaps as a line graph, right? Yeah, so ordering. What's the order of the data? Absolutely, Anna. What is the order of the data here? Am I supposed to focus on India? Okay, because it's bolded. All right, but what about Bangladesh, Indonesia, and Pakistan? Right? Is this targeted towards people in Central Asia? Right? Or is it targeted towards people in Mexico or Thailand? Right? Ordering the data. But yes, line chart, flipping it around. Yeah, these are all great reordering. Thank you, Maya. Exactly, high to low, the highest to lowest trend. So we can see which areas and which countries are making more progress and which ones are making less progress over time. Yeah. Or Alex, small multiples might be another way to do this as well. So small multiples, for those of you who don't know, is combining lots of simpler charts side by side so you can sort of see different trends in different areas or geographic regions. But ordering data storytelling is very important with small multiples as well. And as Meredith said, change the title. What's the point? What's the point of this one? Yeah. All right. Moving on. Next one. Here's a fun one. How would you fix this chart? And yeah, Patty, get rid of the baby in the casket. Clip art. Never put clip art on your charts there. Always a bad idea. So how would you fix this one? Yikes. Start over. Yeah, this is a lot. This is a lot, right? Edward, make it several charts. And in 2019, the folks from Czechia, man, I was in Prague last summer, and yes, they drink a lot of beer. It was great. Wonderful people, great culture, spent time in Prague and the surrounding region, but beer is everywhere. Everywhere. Yeah, choose a focus. Group by different areas of the world. I don't know that a line chart would necessarily work quite so well here, Lucy, simply because this is just the year 2019. So you don't really have a lot of data points to use. But yeah, multiple bar charts, choose a focus, group by different areas of the world, right? Yeah, make it horizontal, order it differently, change the title to show the point of the graph, right? Or as Robert says, different charts with different alcohol or different types of alcohol. There is there. Put an enclosure box around the area, a certain area you want people to focus on. Absolutely, right? And Maddie says, I don't know what story this is telling. Of course, I agree. I don't know what story this is telling other than the folks in Czechia, Latvia, and Austria drink quite a bit more than folks in Uzbekistan, Azerbaijan, or Turkey, right? Yeah, so it's a lot. Or you could use a map. Right. Yeah. So lots of different ways of fixing this chart. Really good work. All right, next up, let's look at line charts and the timeliness of line charts. Because you're going to want to use a line chart primarily to visualize trends over time. That is the reason to use line charts, is to visualize trends over time. That is the primary reason for it. It's not good for grouping by categories or other things. You want to visualize trends over time. And that's really what the purpose of line charts is, especially for non-expert audiences. And when you're building your line charts, put your labels next to the lines they represent. This makes it so much easier to process the labels themselves. So let me show you an example of this. So here we have, as the title says, a trend of occasional cigarette use among United States adolescents by race ethnicity from 1991 to 2021. Cool. We'll use different colors to indicate different groups. There's a legend at the bottom. But there's a principle of user interface design, which has now been carried over into data visualization called Fitts law. And Fitts law says the further away something is, a label is from its target or action, the more difficult it is to process and remember that information. So although Excel always wants to default, to putting the legends down at the bottom of the slide of your visualization, you'll get much better accuracy and understanding if you put the labels next to the lines that they represent. So if I say, okay, take a look, find the data point for the Hispanic group in 2017. Well, now you got to find, okay, which one's Hispanic by the color. Then you got to look at 2017. You got to go back and make sure that, wait, is it the yellow one or oh yeah, it's the yellow one there. You're doing all this work. But if I put the label close to the thing that it's describing rather than far away, this reduces the cognitive overload and increases comprehension. This is a simple and easy thing to do with line charts that make it much easier to understand them. And specifically to find a specific series in a line chart, especially if you have more than like 3, 4, 5 series on that line chart. And also another great technique that you can do is to highlight the most important line and make the others gray. You can tell a story by doing this, right? You probably want to do this when there's more than like 3 series on your line chart, but you can tell a story by highlighting the most important one or the group or series you're talking about and making the other colors gray. So here's an example of this. Again, if I want to highlight the Hispanic data series here, I put that in red and make the other colors gray. If I'm going to focus mostly on Hispanic youth, and their cigarette use, I'm going to highlight that here and put the others in the background. I'm not eliminating the data. I'm still showing the other data for comparison, right? And I might even you want to use other pre-attentive attributes like different kinds of line styles to help differentiate those gray, the similarly gray color series from one another. But here I'm telling a story by emphasizing the one series I want you to look at there. This is a really common technique and a very effective technique when you have lots of lines on a chart and you want people to focus on one. And then when you switch to a different one, like let's say I want to focus on Asian youth next, I'll highlight Asian youth the next by itself on the next slide. Hope that makes sense. And you can use markers to highlight important data points or events. This is something that often we don't do because we can't easily do this in Excel. We probably have to switch over to a tool like PowerPoint to do this. So here I've added a marker that indicates when the U.S. Master Settlement Agreement. The U.S. Master Settlement Agreement was the agreement between the U.S. government and the tobacco companies that really, as you can see from the data here, led over time between 97 and 2021 and even to today to a significant reduction in cigarette use among adolescents, right? That little addition gives us a whole bunch of storytelling that helps contextualize what went on and helps our audience better understand a key event that led to this decline across all the groups in our in the data visualization. And again, Excel doesn't let you do this very easily, but PowerPoint does. So this is one of those cases where PowerPoint's a better tool than Excel in terms of being able to complete your story. But simple annotations can go a very long way. Now, when you're looking at line charts, I really encourage you to not use dual axis charts where you have like two different axes on the same line chart there. You can use small multiples instead, right? As we said earlier, small multiples would be taking, in this case, instead of like putting both series on the same chart, you make two different charts, make them a little smaller to fit in your space so people could actually accurately compare between the two. So here's an example of a dual line chart, dual axis chart here, where we have two different y-axes, one on the left in blue to show stimulant misuse, and one on the right to show specifically methamphetamine misuse in millions here. Now, this line chart seems to indicate that we've had just as much methamphetamine misuse in 2023 as we had for stimulant misuse in 2020. But look at the scales. The scales are totally different. The scale for stimulant use is twice as great as for methamphetamine use. But unless you're paying close attention, you are not going to get that information. Non-expert audiences often will not get this information. They'll be like, oh, well, stimulant use is way down, but now we got to worry about methamphetamine use. When in fact, stimulant use is almost as much as methamphetamine use, according to the data represented in this chart. So don't do dual axis charts. They have lots and lots of problems there. All right, time to play Fix That Chart. Everybody's favorite game, Fix That Chart. Again, I'm going to show you some charts and you're going to tell me how you would fix them based on the information you've learned today so far. All right, first up, this is a lovely question mark chart depicting alcohol consumption in the United States measured in gallons. That's right, gallons per year, per capita, I think it is, all the way from 1790 to 1980. Look at that. We drank almost as much beer in 1980 as we did in 1790. All right, so we're getting some feedback here. Legends next to lines, right? What does, especially down the bottom there, like how do you distinguish wine from spirits and from pure alcohol, especially from, 1934 on, right? That's tough. And the reason why there's a gap in the 20s is because, anyone know why? Anyone know why there's a gap in the 20s? Yeah, prohibition. Yeah. As Alex said, annotate the gap, annotate the gap. Because, your non-expert audience may not know why in the 20s there's that gap there, right? Using, and Magdalena said, dotted lines during the gap from prohibition years, right? Again, legend placement, label the lines, all those things. Absolutely. Or, yeah, Christine, depending on the story you want to tell, you could just keep alcohol, right? Total pure alcohol, as opposed to beer or wine, or spirits in general. Or, yeah, focus on the spirits. Again, depending on the story you want to tell, you could focus, just highlight one of those instead of all those, right? Make all the other ones gray or eliminate beer entirely if that's not your area of concern. Depends on the story that you want to tell there. Yeah. And there's no current data, right? Where's the current data, right, Amy? Absolutely. Or changing the scale, right? You'd have to get rid of the beer series, but you could change the scale and it would tell a very different story and probably maybe even make these sort of ups and downs a little bit easier to see, especially if you're talking about the increase in wine consumption starting in the 30s in this country. All right, next one. Here's a fun one. How are you going to fix this chart? And believe it or not, this is a chart, and this is how it came. This is in a publication. This is from an actual publication. And I had to find out what it was, and it's trends in various types of alcoholic beverage consumption per capita by years. Yeah. Yeah, lots of good suggestions here, right? The vertical text, not having a title. I did not know I had to read back into the article to see what this figure was. It was like figure three in the article. So like in the wall of text of the article, somewhere in there it was like figure three. This has no title on it. And this is how it was published. Not even like I didn't crop the title out. This is how it was published, right? Vertical years, change the labels to horizontal. Remove the grayscale lines in the background, Nicole. Yes. The sort of thickness and intensity of those grays. Why does it need to be a grid like this? Why do there need to be horizontal, sorry, vertical lines, vertical grade lines there as well, right? Update the key. Yes, Noel. What does SBWT mean, right? If I showed this to a non-expert, I mean, even you who are substance misuse professionals, you're like, what is this thing? It's a bad line chart, right? Ah, really good. Obvious. Yes, thank you. Lee pointed out. Also change where the zero is. The zero's not really there, is it? Right? So change that y-axis as well, right? We need that zero to say this is our starting baseline. We don't start at -1. We start at zero. Yeah. So really good. This is a bad visualization. And yeah, you're right, Kristen. Every 5 years would work. I mean, is there something? Okay, maybe if you added a marker at like 1983, it was saying like, why was there, or 1984, why was there a downward trend after 1984? You might want to add a marker or annotation there. But every 3 years, every 5 years, that would absolutely, that's one of the easiest ways to address the vertical labels that Excel creates for you automatically is just change the number of tick marks that are on that x-axis. And if you spread it out, like you put a gap instead of one, make that gap three or make that gap five, it's going to be a lot easier to for all your data points to appear on the x-axis there. Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you, line charts. And now it's time to say goodbye to pie charts. How many of you have ever seen a pie chart like this? Anybody? Ever encountered one like this? And by the way, this is from the publication The Lancet, the leading global journal of epidemiology in the world. This was from a publication that came out last year. Terrible. Terrible. Noise. What stories is it telling? What am I supposed to infer from this, right? What am I supposed to infer from this? There's lines, there's accessibility wise, it's terrible. Look at it. I mean, I can barely read where it says HIV AIDS on that sort of dark olive blue green there. It's terrible. What's the story they're trying to tell, right? Yeah, I love that, Maddie. The only reason a pie chart should be used is to show how much pie has been consumed or not. And I love pie. I love pie. We did not have cake at my wedding. We had pie. I love pie. Pie is good. Now, here's another one. Here's another pie chart, right? This is much better. There's only, what is that? One, two, three, six different categories on the pie chart here, right? But can you tell me which is bigger? Synthetic cannabinoid receptor agonists or stimulants? Which one's bigger? Can you tell me with certainty which one's bigger? What about between sedatives slash hypnotics versus dissociatives? Which one's bigger? Right? This is really hard to tell because again, we're trying to make judgments by arc length, the curve on the outside, on the edge of the wedge of the pie or the piece of pie, right? You can't. It's really, really difficult. Now, this one's better. This is better here, right? Because not only do they do a donut chart, which is a kind of pie chart, and donuts are also delicious in their own way, but not as good as pie. They've given us the actual values. But what have they done wrong here? They didn't put the actual values next to what was in the chart. The order of the values does not match up. If we think about like a pie or donut chart, it's starting at 12 o'clock and sort of moving around the clock, we think that's where we'll look. We're used to looking at the top center of these pie and donut charts because that's where our eye goes on clocks. That may change over time as analog clocks kind of disappear and we only have digital clocks. But for now, that's what it is, right? And there's no order to it there, right? The legend isn't in order, Magdalena. You're totally right. And yes, Christine, I do like sugar. I've had to really try to cut it out of my life. But I do love me some sugar. I really do. Probably after this webinar, I'm going to go grab a piece of See's candy that I got when I was visiting my mom in California last week. Love getting me some See's candy. So pie charts are still okay. You can still use a pie chart when you need to do a very simple part to whole comparison, right? Pie charts are really great for that, right? When we need to do simple part to whole comparison. So here's an example of this, right? This is a easy to understand pie chart. It's well labeled. There's not really accessibility issues here. It provides values as well as the visual that we have of the pie slices. And we can see very clearly that no bystanders is bigger than bystanders. So it works well. But that said, the reality is that pie charts are almost always the wrong visualization choice. Almost always. A bar chart, a line chart, a tree map, any number of other different choices are going to wind up being better than a pie chart. Pie charts are really bad at showing slight variance between data points. They're a poor visualization choice overall because we have a hard time discerning exact amounts when they're visualized as angles and arcs. There are cases when a pie chart can and should be used, but very often, like we saw in that first thing from the Lancet, they're crammed full of multiple categories of data. And so it becomes almost impossible to discern individual values and make accurate comparisons. And again, here's this last donut chart that I showed you, and you pointed out some of the problems with it. You know what? This would probably be a lot better designed and understandable and process it. Our non-expert audiences can process it much more quickly if we turn it into a bar chart. Look how much easier that is to process. Now, yes, I categorize things using different colors, right? So I put opioids and synthetic opioids in the same color, natural opioids in a slightly similar but different color, and then the others in the blue as well. But it's so much more easy to understand the differences in values, right? The organization of data when I use a bar chart. Simpler, much simpler. Now, pie charts can be useful. They can be useful with maybe 2 to 3 data points. They can be used or should be used when you only have a small number of data points, 2, 3, probably no more than that, when you really want to do a basic part to whole comparison, when you're saying this major segment is part of this larger whole, or here's how much it takes up proportionally of this larger whole, like budgets, for example. If you're showing like one part of the budget is huge compared to everything else, pie charts are much better for that. Again, if you only have like 2, 3, 4 categories in there. And you should also, when you're doing it, try to make sure that things are clear, right? So again, I could do a pie chart if I want to show just how opioids play into this data set right here, right? Let's extract just the opioids. Look at just opioids from here or from this bar chart. I can go ahead and I can say, okay, look at how much traditional opioids and synthetic opioids form the problem as opposed to natural or semi-synthetic opioids. That's a different storytelling choice. Again, I'm limiting the number of categories, so that's okay for using a pie chart. Now, if you want to show proportions or more specifically probabilities, you're going to want to use a waffle chart. And a probability is like 1 in 10, 1 in 15, 1 in 100. And a waffle chart is simply often a 10 by 10 grid where each colored cell in the grid represents 1 percentage point, in this case out of 100, or if it's a 5 by 5, 1 out of 25 in that case. So in this waffle chart here, we're showing a proportion of 1 in 25. Now, 4% may not feel or seem like a big number, but if you make 1 out of 25 squares red, as I did in this case, it suddenly carries more weight. It makes your audience think, well, you know what? That's not really such a small number. And there's a growing body of evidence that suggests that individuals can more effectively understand probabilities like 4% or 10% when they're communicated as frequencies. So 1 out of 10 instead of 10%. And there's a number of pre-attentive attributes that make waffle charts really effective for showing proportions, including an implied common scale, equal size boxes to represent proportion, and color, because different colors which distinguish between different categories, or the filled squares and the not filled squares. And they give us really quick access to doing fast and accurate visual comparisons. So again, if you're trying to show simple probabilities or frequencies, waffle charts are usually better than pie charts. So again, 1 out of 10, 1 out of 50, 1 out of 25, use a waffle chart rather than a pie chart for that. Okay. Um, Yeah, so Lee, we do a version of this in my community for our youth data, but we make the square a graphic of a student at a desk. It's the most powerful part of the presentation, right? Those kind of pictographs, as they call them, where you're using like an image of a person, are great storytelling techniques because you're helping to reduce the abstraction of data. Numbers, quantitative values are extremely abstract. And I talk about this in another webinar I give around storytelling. We fixate on people, on faces much more easily than we do on numeric values. Adding a pictogram can increase the emotional resonance, saying this is not an abstract number. This is a person. This is a child that's being affected by that. Now, the thing you got to look out for is you don't want to like fill up pictographs like halfway to represent 50% or something like that, because the weird shape of those pictographs, the non-square shape, makes it really hard for us to do that correctly and to visually estimate and process that correctly. But if you're like saying like, here are, you want to say 1 in 5, and there's 5 little icons of people and one is red, that's very easy for people to understand because the whole icon is red as opposed to the other 4 icons, which are gray. But again, yes, that's a storytelling choice you and your team have made, Lee, and a really good one. Okay, time to play Fix That Chart on pie charts. Here we go. First one. How would you fix this chart? Make it 2D. Absolutely. But yes, Regina pointed out, and then Yesenia also pointed out, percentages would be better than actual numbers. When you put the actual numbers on there and no percentages, it's like, I got to do the math. And most of us are really bad at doing like comparative math based on division, especially in a situation like this, right? You don't want to do that. Change it to a bar chart. Yep. You're going to see very much more clearly that drug overdose is number one versus suicide. But that 3D representation of suicide gives it more visual weight. And I would even argue, falls is a 6,260 less than others, but falls has more visual weight because of the 3D nature and the hue of that blue really makes it stand out. Yeah. So get rid of what's the scale? That's a great question, Christy. What's the scale there? Yeah, use a bar chart, no 3D, percentages shown, all those things. Yeah, use a bar chart. Yeah. Yeah, no time, date, period, or duration, right? When did this happen? These are all really good. Yes. Yeah, Michelle, I like that. Char looks too happy for such a sad topic. It kind of does look kind of happy. All right, how about this one? How would you how would you fix this one? And yeah, right. Mylicia pointed out, really good point. Make sure to use a more eye-catching color for where you want your audience to look first. Use those pre-attentive attributes, and color is a pre-attentive attribute. Really good point. Really good point, Mylicia. All right, so how would you fix this one? Magdalena says, what is the context? Define light, moderate, and heavy. Yeah. What does heavy and moderate and light mean? My definition of a light drinker is probably going to be different than yours, at least for me, because I don't necessarily work in substance misuse prevention and I enjoy my bourbon. Different title. What is the title? Yeah. Two of the colors are too similar, right? A bar chart. This is ordinal data, Alex. Absolutely. This would be so much more effective as a bar chart. Yeah. Say what it is, what it means, not what it is. Exactly, Samantha. Exactly. All right. So I think you got the point there. Yeah, add solid lines into the sections. If you need to keep it as a pie chart, add solid lines. Make it much clearer right there. What are the ages of the adults, right? What is the context? This chart isn't necessarily terrible, but it lacks a lot of context that would help us better understand what it really means at the end of the day. Really good points. Thank you. All right. Finally, let's look at maps. Everybody loves a good map. I've shown you plenty of maps today because I love maps. I think maps are really interesting. And while everybody loves maps, maps should really only be used to show geographic relationships between data. So while you can plot things like the frequency of overdoses by county or vaccination rates by state, whenever you have location-based data, you should think long and hard about whether or not the map is the right visualization. Are you trying to show geographic relationships, or are you simply trying to rank and order pieces of data that just happen to have location as one of the variables? Really important distinction, right? Are you trying to rank and order pieces of data that just happen to have location as one of the variables? Because most times with choropleth maps, we are trying to rank and order data. But let's be frank. People like maps because they can literally see themselves in the data. They can see where their state is on a map and how it visually ranks, sort of, or where their country is, or where their family lives. We can see ourselves in the data really easily with maps. And so we create this kind of emotional connection to maps because we either live in that area, we visited those areas, or we know people who are living in those areas. That's why people love maps, because they can see themselves and they form an emotional connection to that. So while tools like Excel do a pretty good job at making maps easy to build, there are definitely some problems with maps that I think are important to keep in mind if you use them in your visualizations. And first and foremost, the size of a geographic area may not actually correspond to the importance of the data in that geographic area. Russia is a very large country on the global map, as is China, as is the United States, as is Australia. So these countries can sometimes have an outsized influence on our immediate perception of the data when we're doing that sort of initial visual processing and ranking. And it often takes additional time and care to say, oh, no, 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 wait, this country isn't as important. It's just really big compared to those other countries, which are much smaller, but maybe have much higher data values. And it's hard for us to accurately compare and rank different areas when states or countries or regions have different sizes and shapes, because when it comes to perceptual ranking, remember, we're not very good at ranking and sorting non-square or non-rectangular shapes. And most countries and states are not rectangular, even counties. Counties a little bit more, but most states, most counties, not rectangular there. So here we have an example of this, right? This is a choropleth map that shows illicit drug use other than marijuana in the past month by people 12 and older in the year 2024. So if we look at this, where does your eye go first? I'm going to guess it goes to Texas because Texas is a large state. Now, Louisiana, which has the highest values here, jumps out at you, right? Because of that L-shaped state. It's almost a physical character in our alphabet we can recognize. But when we look at this, it's like, I can't stop looking at Texas because it is so big. It has an outsized influence on our perception of this map, even if we want people to look at Tennessee and Louisiana instead. So I can change the colors here to reduce the importance of Texas. But even so, it still looms large because of the shading that's different from the rest of the US and simply the size of that shape right there. So again, just because this is like the brightest value or the most important value doesn't mean that's where your eyes are going to go first because of, again, in this case, which is this is the defaults that Excel gave me, right? My eye goes right there. Less so here, but it is something you need to take into account because it will bias your viewer's perception of that choropleth map. And this works in the reverse too. You saw this map in that earlier exercise where we're writing titles, and the counties on this map are all pretty much the same size, which doesn't indicate the importance from a population perspective of this county. This was one of the questions that somebody had asked me, right? Well, isn't there sort of missing data because Cincinnati, Columbus, Cleveland, they have higher populations there. They are going to have higher values here, right? So in this case, like for example, I don't know if you can see it very well, Franklin County is slightly smaller than Pickaway County, but it's a lot more important from a population or sample size perspective because it's where the city of Columbus is, but you don't get that in the choropleth map because the choropleth map can only map one series. And in this case, it's years of lost life. So these are things to look out for if you're using maps and choropleth maps, which is pretty much what most people use here. So how you divide up the data and correlate that to specific colors is important because gradients, the sort of shading, like from lighter to darker, darker to lighter, might distort our perception and ranking of the data based on the colors chosen. And that difference in color may not represent also a particularly large value shift, right? Especially as scales defaults sometimes use a continuous gradient, which makes it hard to determine like colors between different states or counties or geographic regions. So you want to make sure that when you're labeling your bins on your choropleth map, that your audience understands there's a full range. It's not just, you know, really close variations because that's the default color set Excel gave you, there's some pretty significant differences. 0 to 50,000, 50,000 to 100,000. That's a big difference. And you want to make sure you label that there so that the audience understands there's a full range and you don't simply jump from one discrete value to another single discrete value when you're changing colors. So and you also don't really want to pick really complementary colors here, like red and orange. So look again how Wisconsin jumps out because of the brighter color hue, even though its value is lower than Indiana or Ohio. And also here, are Illinois and Minnesota the part of the same bin or not, right? With this particular color combination, it's a little bit hard to tell. So you have to be really careful about the colors that you choose and the gradients, the bins that you choose there as well. So to address many of these issues, what many or some, a good number of visualization designers will do is they'll have that choropleth map that allows us to find ourselves physically in that data to make that emotional connection, but also, and also I will also say to see that kind of full range across the entire geographic area that's covered, but then also show the actual specific values in a bar chart that's placed right next to the choropleth map so we can quickly and easily rank individual states, regions, or countries without losing that kind of overall context of the countrywide or global perspective. So here I had this map again, right? This is the map I showed you before. And here's, here's how it would look with a bar chart included. And again, this is illicit drug use other than marijuana in the past month by people ages 12 plus in 2024. So using a bar chart to rank specific values across states or countries is often much clearer. Because here we see very clearly that Iowa comes in as number one and Ohio comes in as last, right? But by placing locations on a map and looking at how they're positioned relative to one another, we're able to see unique issues that a bar chart alone might not make visible to us, right? There's value in both of these things here, right? It's easier to understand, right, Samantha? Not just the bar chart, but then also we could look at that geographic map and be like, is there a relationship between the higher illicit drug use in Indiana, in Iowa, and then also how it plays out in Illinois and Minnesota. Is there physical proximity a reason for this or a cause of this, right? I can't say yes or no from this, but maybe it is. It allows us to see and ask other questions there. So again, people love maps and being able to see themselves in the maps themselves. You just need to make sure that the most important data is the where, the location, and that you're not just trying to rank data using color, which is one of the least accurate pre-attentive attributes. All right, time for our last round. It's the last round of the game. Fix that chart. Here we go. We're going to show chloropleth maps here. First up, this is from Newsweek. This was published in Newsweek just about a month ago. States with highest drug use issues in 2025. This was published just a few months ago. How would you fix this? No legend. Exactly. This is how it was published. I did not like crop out the legend or anything like that. But what do the colors mean? Right? What do the colors mean? Super important. But also, as Amy pointed out, too many colors. Why are there blues and then something in the blue hue, right? Blue hues versus orange and red hues. Those are contrasting colors. Why? Shouldn't it be like a more continuous scale here? This is one of the challenges of using color to indicate quantitative value. Right, Lee, the color scheme doesn't make sense, right? Yeah, it just doesn't make sense. And we got to add some numbers. We've got to have some legends. We need something, right? Yeah, Sylvia, a gradient, a continuum of one line, one color would be clearer, probably. We have to make sure our bins are really clearly labeled. So it's clear to differentiate between, say, in this case, like Ohio and Texas, or I'm sorry, that's Indiana and Texas, right? There are slightly different shades of blue there, but there's no order. It's really hard. All right, next one, last one. How would you fix this one? So not only do we have a choropleth map, we also have a sort of pictogram map, right, as well, where small circles indicate small values and large circles indicate much higher values. Yeah, okay, this is great. Use actual data, not circles, right? What do the colors mean? There's no legend for that. Numbers would be better. Totally agree, right? Change the circles to numeric values. Do something else. Make it a line chart so we can easily compare and rank, right? The colors don't make sense. The circles don't necessarily make sense either, right? Are you is and is it low or medium? Is that anchoring like the capital city? Is it just saying here it is for the state? Some circles, some state labels are inside. What about Connecticut, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland? Why is Maryland on there twice? Colors are confusing. Yeah, this is bad. Looks kid friendly. Yes, it does, but it's not remotely accurate at all. Terrible. Terrible, terrible. So can I let you in on a secret here? Can I let you in on a secret? This map, this visualization was made by AI. It was published, but it was made by AI. This points out to one of the real limitations of generative AI tools. This is made by a current class leading model, but this is one of the generative AI tools. Terrible. Terrible, right? Not entirely terrible. Got the map of the US correct, but just bad. So I actually had one of my students make this as part of an exercise in one of my classes, and I thought it was such a great example about where the real limitations of using AI for creating data visualizations is, and a really good example of a bad choropleth map, which has too many goals, too many things done wrong. There, yeah, yeah, and a human should have reviewed this before publishing. Agreed. Agreed. Very much so. All right. So to wrap up, finishing up here today, remember, figure out the story you're trying to tell before you create your visualization or chart. Write good titles that tell us what the data means, not what the data is. What the data means, not what the data is. And then use those pre-attentive attributes to your advantage to help the eyes of your non-expert audience see exactly what you want them to see. And I don't know what happened there on that last little thing. Sorry about that. I was probably typing something and didn't pay attention. But there you go. So I hope you can take what you learned today and go out and tell a story with a visualization, right? Go out and tell a story with a visualization. Tell us what the data means, not what it is. Think about the kind of chart you're using, and bar charts are probably best for all those things, and use those pre-attentive attributes to help us see what we want to see, what you want us to see, to emphasize the story you're trying to tell. So I'm going to stick around, ask any questions. Now's the time to ask questions if you have them. I know that the team from the Great Lakes PTTC has a couple of more things for you before, so don't disappear quite just yet. But if you have questions, you can type them into the Q&A. That's great, or type them in the text chat. I'm happy to do either one. It's really up to you. Stephanie, I don't think you can use your mic here, so if you don't mind typing your question into the chat there, I'm happy to answer it for you, or you can put it in the Q&A pod as well. And thank you for the kind words. I love talking about this stuff. I love talking about storytelling. Storytelling is so foundational to almost everything we do. Almost everything that we do, whether it's just chatting with our kids or our colleagues, or creating a report, or giving a presentation, or thinking strategically about a really hard problem in substance misuse prevention, designing an intervention. Stories are around us all the time. We construct almost our entire world through stories and storytelling, because that's how we give meaning to facts and data, our conceptual ideas. So think about that. Storytelling is wonderful. I give other presentations about storytelling through the Great Lakes PTTC. I think, do we have one scheduled, Chris? I can't remember about this or
The
not.
last of the series for this fiscal year, but we will definitely be looking at doing more next fiscal year.
Excellent. So Nicole asks, are there other resources or tools that I suggest? So I don't have it here with me. I'd pull it up. There's a great book. There is a great book by Jonathan Schwabish, and it's called Better Data Visualizations. So if you want like all the resource, all the research, all the scientific studies, all of here's the data, here's the studies that say like why bar charts are better than most other types, and why choropleth maps are both powerful and really problematic. He has a great book called Better Data Visualizations. It's highly visual. He gives examples of lots of visualization types. He has really good ideas and techniques around things that go beyond bar chart, line, and maps. Really great writer. I use a couple of his books in a couple of different of my classes. I highly recommend that story. Yeah, Rebecca, there we go. Thank you for putting that in there. Highly recommend the book. I really recommend you get the physical book. The digital book is fine, but there's something about the printed book that just makes those visualizations stand out even more for me. But great ideas. It's not written from an academic perspective. He cites lots of sources, lots of studies, but he makes it very manageable and very, very meaningful. He wrote it for his colleagues who do data visualization primarily in the city of Washington, D.C., in terms of like policy implementation, lobbying, program design, all those things that we do in public health. I highly, highly recommend it. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Um, So Nicole also wants to know, in the nonprofit world, how long does it take to become comfortable at making pieces that do not look like it was created by a newbie or AI? I think if you take the principles today, Nicole, and really think about, again, what is the story I want to tell, right? What is my title? How does it align with the visualization? What's the goal of my visualization? Making sure you have a title that tells us what the data means and not what it is. If you start there and just do that, that will level up your visualizations so quickly. And again, working in Excel or working with AI, because I showed you an example of a bad AI visualization. I've had Google Gemini, ChatGPT, Claude create some powerful, beautiful visualizations that were awesome for me. It's not all bad all the time. It just takes practice. The more you practice with either Excel, you'll remember how to do these things, or with prompting an AI to get what you want, the more you practice, the quicker and easier, the better and easier it becomes over time. And I'll tell you, by the way, if you're like, I don't remember how to make a line chart in Excel, you can ask ChatGPT. They're great, great tools for doing that kind of like code-based, very regimented order, for very regimented step by step. This is how you do something in a piece of software. They're really great for that kind of stuff. I use tools like ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini all the time to be like, okay, I need to make this formula in Excel, but I don't remember how to do it. And I'll describe it and it'll give me the exact formula that I need, especially for things like alternating colors or like, custom colors, cell highlighting based on values. I can never remember how to do that. Doing that stuff in a tool like asking that question in ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini saves me so much time and prevents me from banging my head against the wall. Yeah. So Rebecca says, I was thinking about comparing workforce shortage US to our state with pictographs, a 1 in 10 or 1 in 4. What do you recommend doing next? So yeah, I think pictographs are great for that. You could do, for example, like one pictograph for, I'd simplify it as much as possible. Do one pictograph for the whole US, like whatever the value, whatever the rate is there. And next to that, do a separate pictograph. Again, this is the idea of small multiples. You're creating two separate visualizations, which kind of tell two different stories, but you're comparing them side by side by physically placing them next to each other. That's what I would do in that case. You're on the right track with doing the pitch graph and rather than doing like a bar chart or something like that, because that'll tell a clearer story for you. Yeah, really good. All right. I don't see any more questions coming in the QA. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time today. I really hope you're going to take what you learned and go tell a story with a visualization. I'm going to turn it back over to Chris and Rebecca, who will wrap things up for us today.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Brian. As always, you are a fantastic trainer, especially at sharing things that all of us might not be comfortable doing and working with. So I greatly
Thank you.
appreciate the time, thought, and your wonderful expertise at being able to deliver the information. So huge thank you.
Thank you.
Few last things for you all. Want to make sure you know about some upcoming events from the Great Lakes PTTC. We have on June 17th a logic models and evaluators training. It's going to be a webinar. This is going to build off of the logic models training that we did back in March. So if you didn't get a chance to watch or participate in that training, recommend that you watch the recording because this is going to build off of that. So so now that you know how to create a logic model, what do you do with it? How do you use it? How do you apply it? So this is next steps with that. July 9th, we're going to talk about continuous quality improvement in terms of prevention. On July 14th, we're going to talk about community engagement of how do we get people engaging in our prevention. So meet them where they are. July 21st, we're going to talk about collaborating across systems for sustainable prevention. So this is a 2-hour interactive training with breakout rooms for intermediate and advanced prevention professionals. August 3rd to 14th, we have an asynchronous online moderated course on ethics and prevention. That is, there is an application required for that. Priority is given to Region 5 folks for that. Green Means Go, a guide to adapting substance misuse prevention programs. We're going to talk about fidelity and adaptation on August 25th. So we do have some other events as well. So if you go to the website link at the top of that, which will also, I think Rebecca probably already put it in the chat, but a link to that events page, you can see more that's happening as well. As always, if you are a social media kind of person, if you would like to follow us on LinkedIn and Facebook, you can get daily updates from us of information we think that would be helpful for you in your work in prevention. So we'd love to have you follow us on those platforms. And last but not least, we have our GIPRA evaluation form that's required by our funders for us to be able to report on what we're doing. But more importantly, it provides us feedback on how well we're meeting your needs. So what's working well for you in these trainings? What if we did differently would make them work even better? I read every single comment that comes through there, so it does not go into a black hole. Please know that. And with that, I am going to stop sharing and see if any other questions came in that you were wanting to answer. Brian, anything come in?
I did
And
not
he's
see anything,
okay.
but I love that evaluation feedback. Really do.
Yes, it's always helpful, especially in these kind of situations where we don't get to see everybody's faces. It's really helpful to know how well everything landed. So with that, a huge thank you to Rebecca, who's been working behind the scenes to get this everything together to create this event in terms of the logistics and the technology for this, as well as all the wrap up that she does for us. Thank you, Rebecca. And one last huge thank you to you, Brian, for all the work you put into this. And a thank you to you all for the very active participation that you all had in this webinar. It made it work. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Everyone have a great rest of your day. Take care.